Welcome back to Cloud 42. I'm James. I have been doing a lot of cleaning and shop organization lately. Part of this is because I've had some visitors in the shop, and part of it's because organization is just part of life in a small shop. I have a lot of capability packed into a small space here, and without good, dense organization, it becomes impossible to work real quick. Today's project is hardware and small parts organizers. I've tried a lot of different methods over the years, and I finally found something that's working well for me. These are Durham small parts organizer boxes. These are made by Durham Manufacturing, and all they are small sheet metal boxes for organizing parts, and they come in, or you can purchase separately, these cabinets with the pull-out drawer slides to hold the boxes. Now they make these in a couple of different sizes. This is the smaller size. These ones are 2-inch deep. They also make larger ones that are physically wider and deeper, and the boxes I believe are 3 inches deep instead of 2. But I'm interested primarily in small parts, hardware, electrical connectors, small pneumatic fittings, things like that that are not really going to effectively take up the space in a larger box. If you want to organize larger components or larger parts that won't fit in the small compartments or that don't fit easily in the 2-inch deep box, then the larger size would probably be more appropriate. And in fact, it would probably make sense at some point to have some small ones and some large ones in the shop, but I'm starting out just with the small ones. Now, one of the neat things about these is that the boxes lift out of the trays. So these aren't just free boxes, they aren't just drawers, you get both. So you can pull this out, take it wherever you want so that you can work with the contents of the box. But more importantly for me, because it has the drawer slides, I can just pull it out and I don't have to take this someplace and find a flat open work surface to put it on. I can just pull it out right here, sort through it, access what's in the box without having to find a clear piece of work surface, which believe me is rare in my shop. I can just work with it right here, close the lid, and push it back into the rack. So let's take one of these up on the bench and take a closer look. The boxes themselves are really simple. In fact, they're actually kind of rough. These are relatively thin sheet metal, and they're just spot welded together. These are flimsy, but once the box is actually closed and once it's actually latched, it kind of gets spring loaded together and becomes rigid enough. There's no real reason to use more material than this, even though, it does on the surface seem pretty flimsy. The plastic organizers that come in them, on the other hand, are actually quite robust. These are really, really robust plastic injection molded parts, and they're nice and smooth. These have got a lot of features that I like. I love the curves in the bottom because that means that if you drop something in there, it's really easy to get out. You can just sweep it up the side because it just comes right up that curved edge with no drama at all. It makes it very easy to pull things out. The thing that I don't really like about these is there just are not enough compartments for the kinds of things that I do. When I bring in a lot of little parts, I can only have, this is 24 compartments in this box. So for example, if I have some M2 nuts that I need to store, this is the total number of M2 nuts that I have. If I put those in one of those compartments, that is a colossal waste of space. And if I have all of my small hardware spread out in boxes this size, it's going to take so many of these trays that it's just not a practical storage mechanism. Of course, if these default dividers don't have the number or size of boxes that you need, they do have other trays with different sizes, but they're all bigger than this. This is their 24 compartment box, and this is the 12, and I think they have some other ones as well, but they don't have anything that are, small like really what I'm looking for. The other problem that may not seem apparent with this right up front that will become an issue over time is the lack of flexibility, and specifically the lack of flexibility for change. All organization systems are going to change over time, and you need the flexibility to deal with that. So if I come in here and just start organizing my parts into this box, then I'm very rapidly going to get to a situation where I've got things organized, but then I need to come back and add something else. If I've got this box completely full of parts, or I've got things organized, I've got my nice neat little labels printed and stuck in here, and I have this all the way I want it, what happens when I need to come in and I've got a different size of one of these and I need to make room for that? Well, I could just go ahead and put it someplace else, but then I lose my organization. If I want these things categorized and together and organized in a logical way, that means I've got to take everything out and shift it down one compartment all the way through the box and possibly through multiple boxes in order to make room to keep things organized the way I want them. And if I've got everything in these little containers and I've got labels on them, that becomes a royal pain, which means it won't happen, which means that my organization system over time is just going to get messier and messier and messier, and it's going to become impossible to find anything. More importantly, for people like me, I'm a software engineer by trade, and I happen to know there are quite a few of you out there who watch this channel. I get a lot of anxiety around design decisions because I am always thinking about what happens next. So how am I going to organize things into boxes? How am I going to divide them up? What's the taxonomy I'm going to use? What range of sizes of things go in a box together, and what sizes need their own boxes? And I think about that, and I want to get that right because I know that change is going to be hard over time. And so I want to make sure I don't set myself up for failure or set myself up for a whole bunch of work changing or redoing something that I already did. As a result, I get kind of paralyzed and have a hard time starting. Some people don't have that problem. They have no trouble just jumping in. They just jump in and do it. And then over time, they have the exact opposite problem. Things get messy, and then they get really frustrated and have to do kind of a big bang, scatter everything all over the shop and reorganize periodically in order to keep it organized, or they live with the dysfunction. I don't want either. I want it organized the way I want it. I want it to be in a logical organization that helps me to find the things that I need, but I also need to lower the anxiety of those initial decisions. And the solution to that is going to be to build a system that's easy to change. And you'll hear me say this again in this same video. Making it flexible so it can be changed easily is the key to lowering the anxiety of getting started. At least it is for me. So what I want to do is I want to make my own boxes that fit in here. I want a bunch of different sizes. I want to take these trays, get rid of them, and replace them with individual small boxes that are loose, that can be reorganized, but that are sized according to a system so that they will pack neatly and efficiently use all of the space in the box. I can make small ones for cases where I have only a few things, and I can make larger ones for when I have larger objects or large numbers of objects that are the same, so that I'll have room for those. So the first thing we need to do in order to design some boxes that will fit into this is to figure out what it is we're working with. Since I'm going to be 3D printing the boxes, we're going to be working primarily in metric. So I've got a metric tape here, and I just need to measure the dimensions on the inside of the box. So I'll measure the width of the box, measure the depth of the box. Now the depth is a little bit tricky because there is a hinge back here. So I think I'm gonna measure the depth to the inside of that hinge. We do have to worry about when it closes. If you look at the boxes, the organizers that come with it, you can see there's a little lip here on the back. The back edge is lower to accommodate that. So we'll definitely want to take that into account. And since the boxes are flexible and are going to be moved around, we're going to want every box to have that little notch on the back, just in case at some point it gets reorganized and put at the back of the container. So those dimensions are pretty easy. The depth is a little bit trickier because with the tray in here, this tray comes over this front lip and actually takes up a little bit of space so that when the box closes and you use the little spring catch here, it snaps. Where if that is not in there and the lid is allowed to close all the way down metal to metal, then there's basically no springiness there. There's a little bit of misalignment. These are a little sloppy, but you don't get that nice snap. And in fact, the top of the lid is not parallel. So we need to figure out how high do we want the boxes to be so that the lid will bear on them so that we get the proper action on the latch. There are a couple of ways we could do this. We could try to measure this. I actually have taken some calipers to them and tried to measure them and did not have good luck with that. That was kind of a mess. So what I want to do is actually measure this with gauge blocks. The reason being that I can actually stack up gauge blocks, and then I can start with sort of what I think is the right thickness and work with different size gauge blocks, block stacks until I get the right kind of action on the latch. Unfortunately, the gauge blocks that I have are not metric, so I'm going to have to do some translation here. So 2-inch gauge block, a little bit, but it does not feel the same. .1 is way too much. You can actually see, you can see the reflection there. That's deforming. So we need to be someplace in between. So I will fiddle around with the gauge block stacks here until I find exactly the right height that makes this work. Okay, that's going to work. That is a height that I'm happy with. That gives me decent clamping in the front. Let's see kind of how that fits in the back. Yeah, that's right there, just barely touching on the inside. These boxes are not perfect, but yeah, that's going to be good. And if we put it actually under the hinge, yeah, I can see it hitting and deforming that a little bit. So this is the height that we need. I will take the dimension off of this gauge block stack, convert it to metric, and we'll go into the computer and do some designing. I'm going to model the boxes here in Fusion 360, and as usual, I'm going to start with a bunch of parameters. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to change the size and shape of the boxes, and I don't want to have to remodel for every different size that I need. So we'll start with some user parameters here. We're going to start with the tray. So the tray X dimension is 332 millimeters. The tray Y dimension is 233 millimeters. And then the tray Z dimension is 52 millimeters. That's what I measured with the gauge blocks. Now we'll create some parameters here for the number of boxes in each direction. So the number of boxes in X, this is going to be a no unit number. We'll start with 8. And then the number of boxes in Y will be 4. Again, no units on that. Need a couple of other miscellaneous values. Let's create the wall thickness. And I want that to be 1.2 millimeters. At least I think I want it to be 1.2 millimeters, but we'll make it a parameter so I can change it if that turns out not to be right. Now we also don't want the boxes modeled so they actually touch each other. I want a little bit of extra space. So extra space X, let's say 0.3 millimeters per box, and an extra space in Y, let's say 0.5. I want a little bit more in that direction just because I have to work around the hinge. So I think that leaves us ready to calculate the actual size of the boxes. So the box X dimension is going to be the tray X dimension divided by the number of boxes in X minus the extra space in X. And so that's extra space per box. And we'll do the same thing for Y. Box Y is going to be tray Y divided by the number of boxes in Y minus the extra space in Y. I think that is all we need, and we can start modeling. So I will just say create a box. That seems like a good way to start making a box. And for the length, this will be the box Y dimension. For the width, this will be the box X dimension. And for the height, this will be the tray Z. That's, the height that we calculated. And that's our box. Now I would like this to have some rounded edges, so I'll hit F for fillet and just select all of the vertical edges of the box and make that maybe 3 millimeters. Now that's a solid box. To actually turn this into a hollow box, I will hit the shell command, select the top layer, and for the inside thickness, I want this to be our wall thickness that we defined. And just like that, we now have a box. Now I do want the front and back edges of this to be rounded to make it easier to get things in and out. So I'll hit F for fillet. I will turn off the tangent chain so I can select just the front and back edges and make that maybe 10 millimeters. Now I also want to put some chamfers on the bottom. If you print this completely square, most 3D printers are going to expand the bottom a little bit. So I'll say modify, chamfer, select the bottom there. And I think I'll also select these inside edges here and make that maybe 1 millimeter. So that gives us our little chamfer. And then the last thing we need is a notch on the back. So I'll right click on the side, say create sketch. Now I want to project a few things. I'll project the back surface and the top surface. And that'll just give me some lines here in the sketch. Hit L for line, draw in roughly what I want the box to be, or the notch to be. And then I will hit D for dimension. I want the height to be 1.5 millimeters, and I want the overall width to be 15 millimeters. Now, just because I like to have things constrained, I've hit D for dimension, and I will just click these two lines and set that angle to 45 degrees so that our sketch is now all black. It's all fully constrained. And I will select that, hit E for extrude, and we'll just drag this out. And we don't know how big the box is going to be, so I'm just going to go ahead and make that really wide. And that is one box. Now let's see what this looks like if we build them out into a grid. So I'll come in here, right click on the body, and I say create components from body. So now we have a component. I'll just ground this first one so that it will behave nicely. And then come up here to create and select rectangular pattern, object type bodies. Actually, I'll make that components. Select this component. And then for the axes, I will select the X axis and the Y axis. Actually, those are Y and X. I have it rotated, but this will work. Okay, and then for the quantity, the num box is in X. The quantity for the second one here is num boxes Y. And then for the distance, we want this to be spacing, and this will be the box X plus the extra space X. And this direction will be box Y plus extra space Y. And that gives us our grid of boxes. And those are the boxes to fillet 8 wide and 4 high. Now, if we want different size boxes, we can just go in and modify the parameters. So if I come in here and say modify change parameters, and on the num boxes in X, if I change that from 8 to 4, now we have the correct size boxes for 4 across. Or if I want a higher density, I can change that to 12, and we'll have the correct size for 12 across. And we can also do some other things that are kind of interesting here. If we go back to 8, this is the standard grid that I plan to use, which is 8. If we want them double wide, we just set it to 4. But what if we want a box that's triple wide? Well, it's a little bit harder because I can't just say instead of 8 wide or 4 wide, I just want 3 wide, because that's going to divide this up into thirds, and there's no way that will fit into my grid of 8 boxes. But if I want a box that is the width of 3 of these 1/8 boxes, I can just come in here and say 8 divided by 3, and that will give me a box that is triple wide relative to the 8 wide array. Now, 3 of these will not fit, but 2 of these will fit, plus 2 of the 8 boxes. So this is just a way to get these. Of course, I can't generate this whole grid because it's too big to fit in the box, but if I print one of these, it will take up the same amount of space as 3 of these boxes. So I'll go ahead and go through a bunch of different parameters here and generate the STL files for a bunch of different size boxes, send a bunch of them to the 3D printer, print them out, and we can go out in the shop and see how they fit in the trays. I'm printing this batch of boxes on the iFast, and the big advantage of the iFast for something like this is that it has a heated chamber. So I'm using ABS filament here.
It would be a lot harder to print in ABS on an open printer. You'd want to use something like PETG or PLA, both of which would work. But I've got a bunch of partial rolls of ABS, and I do have a printer with a heated chamber, so that's what we're going to use.
Well, I've got a whole sea of boxes here. Let's see how they fit. Now, the only organization rule here I know is that these narrower ones have to be in groups of 3 or they won't fill up, they won't tile properly. You can see this is how the boxes came out. They're actually very nice and clean. It doesn't really matter how perfect these are, as long as they've got the notch, the height's correct, and the dimensions are right, we should be good to go. And those fit great. There's a little bit of extra space, so it's real easy to pull them out, but they also fit nice and easy. Should be really easy to rearrange. And of course, you don't have to have these together in groups of 3, but you do have to have multiples of 3 in a single row in order for this to work. And that seems nice and neat and secure. Now we just have to fill these things up. I'm not going to make you watch me fill these up. That would be boring. I do, however, have a new package of fasteners that need to find a home. These are 30mm M6x1 socket head cap screws. I bought a bag of these because I needed a couple in the last project when I put the power feed on the Z of the mill. I did not have the right length of screws to attach the limit switch. And so I just used something I had, ordered these and put them in. But now I've got 23 more of these that need a home. So this is my M6 to M12 box, and as you can see, of course, I don't have any room for these fasteners. So these are M6 30mm, so I've got M6 miscellaneous. I could just put them in there, but since I have so many of these that are the same, I really would like to have them together. So let's see, M620, M616, M8. So M6 should go in here someplace. But I need room for that, so I'm going to actually reorganize the M8s here. This box actually is empty. Whatever was in there were M8 washers. I'm out, so that can go. Can shuffle these down, and that leaves me room for my M6. Let's see, will these fit all in one of the small boxes? They will. So I'm going to keep that M8 washer box because I will have M8 washers again someday. We just need a label for that. So let's see, I've got 3/4 inch tape in here. And I'm going to do a fixed width label, 1.25 inches long, which will fit in there. And this will be M6 30mm socket cap. This particular label maker, when you print the fixed width, it actually can't rewind the tape to print right on the end, so it puts a couple of little dots to tell you where to cut it. And I'll just use my scale because my fingers don't fit in there. There we go. Nice and crooked to bother everybody on the internet. And that's it. We are back to organize. Everything is in the right order. I can find my M6 30mm socket cap screws if I need them, and I didn't have to do a whole bunch of work to move things all over creation. Turn that around so that the label shows. Now, generally when I put these back in the tray, I do not bother with the latch, because it actually interferes a little bit with this handle and it's a little bit frustrating. So I just leave them this way. That way I can pull out the drawers and just open the lid. Let's take a look at what I actually have in my boxes. I'm starting out at the top here with hardware, with fasteners. And since I live in the US and we use both metric and imperial, I've got drawers for each. This is my smallest metric fastener drawer, so I'm starting here with M2, and this particular box has M2 and M3 fasteners. So I've got my M2, M2.5 stuff, and then get into M3, different kinds of nuts and washers. And then I have miscellaneous screws organized by length. 0 to 10 millimeter, 11 to 20 millimeter, 21 to 40 millimeter. And then I have separate compartments for when I buy a large box. So I bought a whole box of 100 of these, so I have a compartment specifically for that, rather than mixing them into my little miscellaneous drawers for cases where I only have a few. I do try to separate by the type of fastener. These are all socket head cap screws. I have some Phillips screws, I have set screws, I have button head screws, and here's a case where I bought a whole box of a particular button head screw, miscellaneous and single lots of flathead screws. And again, I'm just trying to make this as easy as possible to get to what I need when I need it. So in this case where I've got a large box of mixed fasteners, if I get to the point where I have a lot of different size fasteners in here, this box is filling up and I'm finding it difficult to find the things that I need when I need them, then I will split this into 2 or 3 separate boxes sorted more finely. And you can see that I've left extra space in the box. I have extra compartments so that as I add more fasteners, I have room to grow. Ultimately, if I do fill this whole thing out and need more space, I can shuffle the boxes and even shuffle what's in the boxes because it's easy to pull these out and move them around. It's sort of easy. Next box is M4 and M5, same thing, just larger fasteners. And in fact, you can see some of these you'll recognize. These are the M4 screws that I bought for the grinder project, the belt grinder project, in order to mount the bottom of the air spring. And you know, as the fasteners get bigger, the compartments necessarily get bigger. This drawer is M6 through M12. It's a pretty big range, but I don't have a ton of different types of fasteners in these sizes. But as you can see, as the fasteners get bigger, the compartments get bigger, and I get fewer things in a box. This is probably the first box I have that is going to fill up completely, that I'm going to need to overflow into multiple boxes at some point. 6 through 12 is a pretty large range, but again, just based on what I have, this fits. And because these are all separate boxes and easy to move and reorganize, I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried about leaving space because I can easily adjust later. Moving down the stack, we get into imperial fasteners. This is number 4 through number 10. And you can see I've got quite a lot of 1032. It's a very common size that I use in the shop. The smaller stuff, I really don't touch. Pretty much everything smaller, like 3D printers, I end up doing M3, going into metric. So I don't have a ton of imperial stuff in these sizes, with the exception of 1032. And then all the rest of my imperial fasteners fit in a second box. So I've got fewer boxes of imperial stuff than I have metric, just because I end up using metric a lot more in my shop. Regardless of what people in the comments seem to think about Americans, I actually use a lot more metric than I use imperial. And again, this is a box that if I do much more with any of the larger imperial sizes, I am going to have to split this into multiple boxes. Have a box dedicated to electrical connectors. I've got all of my different size crimp ferrules for crimping onto stranded wire. I've got some sealing, heat shrink butt connectors, and then ring terminals, fork terminals, quick disconnects, ground screws, cable tie downs, all of the things that I would need when doing electrical work on machines. I used to have this stuff scattered around in lots of little boxes. Of course, the ferrules all come in assortment packs. These all came in a plastic box. And I just find it so much easier just to ditch all that stuff and go to these common size trays. Plus, if I'm working on this, I can grab this box and just take it wherever I'm working, and I just have the one box that has all of my crimp connectors. Of course, as my collection grows, this may need to spread to multiple boxes as well. Moving down, I've got a tray with all of my pneumatics in it. I've got all of my different size push-to-connect fittings for tubing. I've got metric and imperial in here because I've worked on projects that use each. I've got all my brass fittings, reducers, and gender changers on these things, couplers. I've got some lock line here that I've used on a few different projects. A whole bunch of little PTC elbows and T's. I've got my air connectors for my air hoses and tools. Got some needle valves and just any pneumatic or small plumbing components that I picked up. And this box is full, so as my collection grows, this one's probably another one of the boxes I'm going to outgrow soon. This also, because a lot of these things are larger, might be a good candidate for one of the larger size Durham boxes. This is the last box that I actually have populated, and this is just miscellaneous hardware. So I've got keys for shafts, I've got Belleville washers and spring washers, I've got arbor shims, I've got springs, cable clamps, grommets, conduit nuts, just all kinds of little miscellaneous things. And again, I don't feel bad about throwing these all in the same box, and I don't have to freak out about the taxonomy and making sure that I really have an organization system that's going to carry me into the future, because it is so easy to just decide, oh, I want my arbor shims to be somewhere else. These are labeled on the boxes themselves, so I just pull them out and move them, and I don't even have to rearrange anything. The only thing I have to change is the label on the outside of the box. And the rest of this is really fluid. And I cannot emphasize enough how much mental energy I expend worrying about the future of whatever decisions that I make. So organizing something like this for me has always been a very difficult challenge, and it's part of the reason why I procrastinate. It's part of the reason why it takes me so long to do this stuff, is because I want to make sure I get it right so I don't immediately have to redo it. This is exactly the opposite. This system is designed specifically so that I don't have to worry about that, with the intention that it is going to change, because, spoiler alert, any organization system is a living thing and it is going to change. So designing around that specifically takes away that mental barrier that at least I have. Maybe I'm weird, but it takes away the barrier that I have to being able to get organized in the first place. 90% of this is going to be just fine the way it is, and the 10% that's not, I can easily change it, and knowing that I can easily change it takes away the anxiety I have about doing it in the first place. Now I've got two more boxes down here in the bottom. This one's just got a bunch of miscellaneous empty boxes in it. This one's still got one of the original organizers, so I have room to expand. There's lots of stuff that's not here. My bearings are not here, any of my timing belt components. Many of those are things that might do better in the larger size Durham box, so we'll see if I end up expanding this system in the future with some of the bigger boxes. I think the box has turned out great. I've had my 3D printers running for a couple of weeks straight now, making all of the little boxes that I need and using up all of the partial rolls of filament I had lying around. If you need a lot of boxes, it can take a while, but I just work through it one tray at a time. Of course, something like this is never really done, but that's part of the beauty of this system. Organization is a continuous process, and with the printed boxes, it's easy to make only what you need today and then adapt over time. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, feel free to subscribe, and maybe consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. Patrons can download files for all of my projects, including the 3D model and printable files for this one. I also post Patreon lens clips periodically for a little peek behind the scenes. Thank you for watching.